One of the most remarkable things about Stravinsky's ballet Petrushka is that it was never meant to be a ballet. It began life as a sort of musical distraction, a compositional exercise to refresh Stravinsky's orchestral writing before tackling what he knew would be one of the most challenging tasks he would face in his career to date: writing a ballet about a girl dancing herself to death. When Diaghilev, the director of the Ballet Russe in Paris who commissioned the Rite of Spring, visited Stravinsky in Switzerland to check on its progress, he was understandably surprised that not a single note of the Rite of Spring had been written. But when he heard what Stravinsky had been working on, an orchestral piece about a puppet who comes to life, Diaghilev convinced him to use it as the seed for a larger work, a ballet. And so, Petrushka was born. The part that Stravinsky had already written became the second scene, or tableau, and he set to work writing 3 additional scenes. The music that Stravinsky wrote for the ballet is rich, complex, sometimes unnervingly simple and clean, sometimes aggressive, driving, jagged, and unrelentingly rhythmic, but always full of life. There is so much that appeals to me in the music, but I think the single greatest thing that Stravinsky shows through this score is his almost unparalleled ability to tell a story. The ballet is set during the Shrovetide festival in St. Petersburg in 1830. Scene 1 begins. Straight away we hear a bustling crowd, tremolos in the clarinets and horns underneath a pentatonic melody played by a flute. 4 solo cellos respond in unison, playing high in their register. Then a cascading violin line, followed by more tremolos and a fragment of a melody in the bassoons and low strings. We hear it again after a repetition of the opening flute line. And then it's taken over by the full forces of the orchestra. This melody, though, was not written by Stravinsky. This is the Song of the Volochyebniki, a Russian folk song for Easter Day. Stravinsky not only gives us a jostling, energetic crowd in this first scene, but one that's also full of religious fervour. The score starts to bring out different characters from the crowd: dancers, a magician, and musicians playing tunes. When an organ grinder enters, we hear a waltz, quickly interrupted by the loud noise of the crowd. Then the waltz again, followed by a second tune. The first is Stravinsky's own melody, but the second is actually a popular Parisian song, Elle avait une jambe en bois, that Stravinsky heard playing in the street underneath his window whilst writing this scene. On the other side of the stage, a musician with a music box appears, and Stravinsky plays both the music box and organ grinder melodies on top of each other, with occasional sharp interruptions from the crowd. The crowd then takes over completely, and we return to the Song of the Volochyebniki. The opening to this first scene is a masterpiece in storytelling. Multiple melodies jostle for attention, ideas are brought in and out of focus, placed harshly next to each other, and are built up in fragments. There is an imperfection to the music. The crowd is a jagged, frantic mass of characters vying for attention and desperate to witness what will come next. 2 drummers then appear from a theatre at the back of the stage, and a magician, accompanied by chromatic sliding woodwind and string lines, plays the flute. And reveals 3 puppets: a Moor, a ballerina, and Petrushka. The puppets begin to dance. This is the famous Russian dance, a modal, tightly rhythmic melody on top of chords moving in parallel motion. It's quickly disturbed by a shift into a G major tonality, where we hear fragments of a new melody. Stravinsky introduces another folk song here, the St. John's Eve song. The dance moves back and forth between the 2 melodies and eventually reaches an ecstatic climax. At this point, as far as we're aware, the 3 puppets are nothing more than mechanical figures, dancing as if possessed. At the end of the scene, darkness falls on the stage. Into scene 2. With drums echoing and the crowd disappearing, we enter a cell, and Petrushka is kicked on stage by the magician. And it's at this point that he is really brought to life. Stravinsky gives him his own musical identity in the form of 2 chords played on top of each other, C major on top of F sharp major, separated by an augmented 4th. This is the famous Petrushka chord, and is first heard in the form of a clarinet duet. The B-flat clarinet plays a C major arpeggio, and the clarinet in A plays an F sharp major arpeggio, one on top of another. This dual tonality, or bitonality, becomes one of the most prominent harmonic features of the score from this point onwards. After the clarinet duet, the piano takes over, with the right hand playing notes exclusively in C major, and the left hand playing notes in F sharp major only. This is then followed by a blazing trumpet tune, Petrushka's theme, and underneath it we again hear the bitonal harmony in the woodwinds, strings and piano. This scene is very different to the first. There are no set pieces or dances. Instead, it's a through-composed narrative that sets up the key conflict in the ballet. We are now seeing Petrushka as human, experiencing suffering and depression, but also love. He's in love with the ballerina, and he tries to convince her to love him. But Petrushka can't really control his emotions. We hear a chaotic mixture of fragments of ideas on top of a constantly shifting harmony, all in varying time signatures. Petrushka is a child without the words or means to express himself. The ballerina rejects him, and he cries out. The third scene in the ballet is the most problematic in many respects. The music itself is still energetic, harmonically and rhythmically challenging, and has some of the most interesting orchestration in the whole of the score, like the doubling of this melody in clarinets, separated by 2 octaves, combined with pizzicato strings, harp and percussion. But the issue is really with the treatment of one particular character. The third scene is set in the Moor's cell, and shows the ballerina falling for him. They dance together, and we hear in the score the ballerina and the Moor's melodies combining. At the end of the scene, Petrushka enters and is devastated to see the ballerina being seduced by the Moor. He tries to attack him, but is thrown out. The character of the Moor, though, is presented as brutal, aggressive, and unintelligent, and unfortunately the music only helps amplify this degrading characterization. The racist undertones of this scene are clear, and I think it's only through the distance that the music has achieved from the original staging of the ballet that it's been able to avoid most of the criticism and scrutiny that it deserves. In the fourth and final scene, we return to the Shrovetide fair. The crowds are back, and the festivities are reaching their peak. We hear a shimmering orchestral texture. This scene returns to the set pieces and dances of scene 1. First, the dance of the nursemaids. We hear a new melody for this section, introduced by solo oboe. This again is a Russian folk song, Ya Venko Meloda, which is about a drunk wife as she stumbles home. The maids then pick up another Russian folk song, Ach Viesieni Moi Sieni, a simple love song, which is first played by the oboes, then by trumpets, and finally by the full orchestra. Then we hear both melodies on top of each other, with the strings taking the first melody and the horns playing the second. The shimmering orchestral texture then returns, and Stravinsky introduces another 2 themes, one for the merchant and one for the dancing girls. Then, without preparation, heavy driven string chords and syncopated clarinet and horn outbursts for the dance of the coachman and the stable boys. The trumpets blaze out 4 notes above the texture, the beginning of another Russian folk song. This time a street song, which is split on first hearing between the trumpets, pizzicato strings, trombones and horns. It builds to a climax and the nursemaids join in the dance. We hear their opening melody on top of the string chords from the coachman's dance. It grows in intensity, and the nursemaid's melody is then played by soaring strings and woodwind. And then the coachman's theme is taken over by the full orchestra. Trumpets and strings play the tune in a perfect canon on top of a beating, stamping rhythm to create, I think, the most joyous music ever written. The music that follows, despite not really being connected to any of the puppets, or Petrushka in particular, seems to hint at the tragedy that is to follow. After a few more dances, we hear a solo trumpet slowly appearing out of the texture, playing a top F sharp. Petrushka is chased out of the theatre at the back of the stage by the Moor and struck in the back of the head. In many ways, the music of Petrushka's death is surprising. Considering how dramatic the music has been leading up to this point, you'd expect something more from Stravinsky. But maybe we're not really viewing this from Petrushka's point of view. Maybe we're standing in the crowd, looking on at a puppet collapsed in front of us, wondering what to feel, or whether to feel anything at all for a thing made of wood and sawdust. With a collective apathy, the crowds disperse, accompanied by undulating horn chords permeated with remnants of Petrushka's harmony and music. The ballet finishes with one final musical nod to the puppet. Unison pizzicato strings land on a C, followed directly by an F sharp. If this isn't enough to convince you of Stravinsky's genius as a storyteller, I don't know what is. Thank you so much for watching. Petrushka is probably my favourite ballet of Stravinsky's, so it's been fascinating to get to know it better. Do let me know your thoughts though about the difficult third scene. Do you think the story in this scene, for example, should affect how we think about the music and the ballet as a whole? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you did enjoy this video, then please do consider subscribing to my channel. See you next time.